Reddit story. Bride exposes groom's secret. At the altar, weddings are meant to be the happiest day of your life. But for me, it turned into a nightmare. As I stood there in my wedding dress, my heart racing with excitement, I had no idea that everything I thought I knew about the man I was about to marry was about to come crashing down. It started with the little things. He'd become more distant in the weeks leading up to our wedding. He'd get easily annoyed by the smallest things, sometimes even snapping at me for no reason. But I told myself it was just stress. After all, planning a wedding can be overwhelming. As the days passed, the feeling in my gut grew stronger. There were strange changes in his behavior that I couldn't ignore anymore. His phone would constantly buzz, and whenever I was around, he'd quickly swipe it out of sight. He started taking business trips without any explanation, but the thing that really tipped me off was the way he would avoid eye contact when we talked about our future. The man who once gazed at me with love now looked at me like I was a stranger. I began asking myself, was it my imagination, or was he hiding something from me? A growing sense of unease filled me as the wedding day approached. Still, I didn't want to believe it. I wanted to trust him. After all, he was the man I was about to marry. He had to be the person I thought he was, right? Then, just a few days before the wedding, everything changed. I was at home, going through some paperwork, when I stumbled upon his laptop. Normally, I wouldn't snoop, but that day, something in me made me open it. And what I found shocked me to the core. I discovered an email thread that confirmed my worst fear. There were messages, dates, and even plans. He had been seeing someone else for months. The pain hit me like a freight train. How had I been so blind? How had I trusted him so completely? I sat there in shock, staring at the screen. Every little moment that I had brushed off suddenly became clear. He had been lying to me for months. Our entire relationship was built on a lie, and the worst part? He wasn't even planning to tell me the truth. He was planning to marry me while still holding on to this secret life. I had a decision to make. I couldn't marry a man who had been dishonest with me. I couldn't walk down the aisle and pretend that everything was fine when it clearly wasn't. So, I made the hardest decision of my life. I wasn't going to marry him, and I was going to expose the truth, right there in front of everyone. Bride exposes groom's secret. At the altar. The days leading up to the wedding felt like a blur of confusion and turmoil. I couldn't stop thinking about what I had found. Every time I looked at him, I saw the lies he had woven. The man I thought I knew, the man I was about to marry, was a stranger. I kept telling myself that I must be overreacting, that I was just stressed about the wedding. But deep down, I knew it wasn't just nerves. I started to replay every moment we'd spent together in my mind. The way he would get defensive whenever I asked about his late-night work meetings. The way he would always deflect questions about his past relationships. How many times had I brushed off his strange behavior, telling myself that it was just his personality? How many times had I ignored red flags because I didn't want to believe the worst? It wasn't just his actions, though. It was the subtle shift in his attitude toward me. I had spent years building a life with him, and yet I began to realize that his commitment to me had been hollow. He wasn't the man I had fallen in love with. He wasn't the man who had promised to stand by me through thick and thin. But it wasn't until the night before the wedding that I knew for sure. I had gone over everything in my mind and couldn't stop myself from confronting him. I asked him about the emails I had found, about the other woman, about the lies. At first he denied everything. His face turned pale and he stammered, trying to explain it away. But then he slipped. His story didn't add up. "You're imagining things," he said, his voice shaking. "You're just stressing out before the big day." But I could see it in his eyes. I could feel the truth. He wasn't just lying to me. He was lying to everyone. The cold, hard reality was that he had been living a double life, and I had been too blind to see it. That was when I realized I couldn't go through with the wedding. I couldn't stand there in front of our families, pretending that everything was fine. I couldn't marry a man who had betrayed me so deeply. The decision was made. I was going to stop the wedding before it even started. Bride exposes groom's secret. At the altar. The day of the wedding finally arrived. As I woke up that morning, I couldn't shake the feeling of dread that hung over me like a dark cloud. The excitement I had once felt was replaced with a deep, unsettling anxiety. How could I go through with this knowing what I now knew? How could I marry someone who had been lying to me for so long? I tried to keep it together as I got ready. My bridesmaids helped me with my dress, and everything seemed to be moving like clockwork. On the outside, it looked like the wedding was going perfectly. But on the inside, I felt like I was about to collapse. I could hardly breathe, knowing what I was about to do. The thought of walking down the aisle to the man who had deceived me filled me with both anger and sadness. As I made my way to the venue, my thoughts raced. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest. The closer I got to the church, the more I realized that there was no turning back. This wasn't just about a wedding anymore. It was about confronting the truth, about ending the charade. I knew I couldn't stand there, pretending everything was fine, while the man I loved had shattered my trust. Once I arrived at the church, I went straight to the dressing room. My bridesmaids could tell something was off, but I just smiled and told them I was fine. How could I explain to them that the man I was about to marry had been living a lie? How could I tell them that I had found out he was seeing someone else? I couldn't. Not yet. They would find out soon enough. The ceremony started, and I could hear the guests taking their seats, the familiar music playing softly in the background. I stood there, frozen in place. The doors were about to open, and I was supposed to walk down the aisle, but all I could think about was the secret I was carrying, the secret that would change everything. Bride exposes groom's secret at the altar. The moment had arrived. As I stepped into the church and began walking down the aisle, I couldn't shake the heavy feeling in my chest. The weight of the secret I was about to reveal hung over me like a storm cloud. Everyone was watching, their faces filled with anticipation, but all I could think about was the man standing at the altar, the man who had deceived me. He didn't know what was coming. He was smiling as if everything was perfectly fine, unaware that the truth was about to shatter his world. When I reached the altar, I could see the confusion in his eyes. He was expecting the usual vows, the promises of love and commitment. But instead, I took a deep breath and turned to face our guests. "I can't marry him," I said, my voice shaky but resolute. The room went silent, everyone staring in disbelief. "Because I just found out who he really is." The groom's face turned pale, and I could see the panic flicker in his eyes. His smile faded, replaced by a look of terror. Visibly uncomfortable, while the rest of the guests exchanged confused glances. The officiant stood there, frozen, unsure of what to do. It was as if time had stopped. I took a moment to gather my thoughts. "I found out that he's been seeing someone else for months," I continued. "I discovered the truth just days before our wedding, and I can't pretend that everything is fine when it's clearly not." A murmur went through the crowd, and I could see the shock on their faces. The groom didn't say a word. He was speechless, his mouth agape. He tried to grab my hand, but I pulled away. "Stop," I said firmly. "You don't get to manipulate me anymore." Bride exposes groom's secret. At the altar. The room was filled with shocked gasps as I spoke the words I never thought I'd say. The groom stood there, unable to process what had just happened. I saw his face redden with anger, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for someone to blame. But no one was going to help him now. This was the moment of truth, and there was no turning back. He tried to regain control, but his voice was shaky as he finally spoke. "You're making a huge mistake," he said, his words almost pleading. "You don't understand. This is all just a misunderstanding." But I knew better. I had seen the evidence with my own eyes. There was no misunderstanding. There was no excuse for what he had done. "Don't try to gaslight me," I snapped. "I saw the emails, the messages. You've been lying to me for months." I could feel the weight of the truth pressing down on me, but I stood my ground. The tears I had held back for so long were finally starting to spill, but I didn't care. This was bigger than my heartbreak. This was about standing up for myself and not letting him walk away unscathed. The guests were still in shock, some with their hands over their mouths, others looking at each other with disbelief. I could hear a few whispers, but the tension in the room was so thick that it felt like no one could move. My heart was pounding, but I wasn't scared anymore. The decision had already been made. I was done. The groom's sister, who had been standing near the back of the room, finally stepped forward. "You don't know what you're talking about," she said, her voice defensive. "He's not like that. You've got it all wrong." But her words didn't sway me. I had seen enough to know the truth, and I wasn't going to let anyone convince me otherwise. "I'm not wrong," I said, my voice steady now, "and I'm not going to stand here and pretend that I don't know what's been going on. This wedding ends now." I turned to the officiant, who was still standing frozen in place. "Please, just call it off," I said, my voice finally breaking. Bride exposes groom's secret at the altar. The silence in the room was suffocating. Every eye was on me, some filled with sympathy, others with judgment. The groom, still in shock, stood frozen at the altar, his face a mix of disbelief and frustration. His mouth opened and closed like he was about to speak, but no words came out. He was completely exposed, and there was nothing he could do to fix the mess he had created. "I want all of you to understand something," I said, my voice growing stronger. "I didn't come here to ruin his life. I didn't want to do this, but I can't marry a man who's been lying to me for months. I can't stand here and pretend that everything is okay when I know the truth." I could see the realization settling in on the faces of the guests. Some of them had been loyal friends of his, others close family members, but none of them seemed to have had any idea about the lies he had been hiding. A few of them were visibly upset, shaking their heads as if they couldn't believe it. The groom, finally recovering from his shock, took a step toward me. "Please, just listen to me," he said, his voice desperate. "I never meant to hurt you. I made a mistake. I love you. This is all just a huge misunderstanding." I shook my head. It's not a misunderstanding. You've been cheating on me. You've been lying to me for months, and I'm not going to let you get away with it. This wedding is over." The officiant, still standing there in shock, finally spoke up. "I think we should all take a step back," he said, his voice low and uncertain. "This is a very difficult situation." But I wasn't going to step back. I had already made my decision. There was nothing left to say. I turned to the guests, who were still looking at me with a mixture of shock and disbelief. "I'm sorry you had to witness this," I said, my voice breaking again, "but I'm not going to let him destroy my life any longer. The wedding ends here." With that, I turned and walked down the aisle, leaving the stunned guests and the broken groom behind. Bride exposes groom's secret. At the altar. I walked out of the church with my heart racing, tears streaming down my face. The chaos behind me felt surreal, like I was trapped in a nightmare. I could hear the faint murmur of voices, the hushed whispers of people who had witnessed the moment I had been dreading for months. The cool air outside hit me like a slap, grounding me in the reality of what had just happened. I had ended my wedding, the one thing I had been planning for years. The moment I stepped out, I could see my best friend running toward me. She was the first to find me after everything unfolded. Her eyes were filled with concern, but there was a sense of relief in her expression too. She knew that I had made the right decision. As she wrapped her arms around me, I couldn't help but break down. "I'm so sorry," she said softly, "but you did the right thing. You can't marry someone who treats you like that. He doesn't deserve you." I nodded, wiping my tears away. I thought I could fix it. I thought I could change him, but I can't. I can't change someone who doesn't even want to change for me. For the first time in months, I felt like I could breathe. The weight on my shoulders had been lifted. I had faced the truth, and although it hurt more than I could have ever imagined, I knew that walking away from him was the only choice I had left. I could already imagine what people would say. The gossip would be endless. Some would say I was being dramatic. Others would probably accuse me of overreacting. But I didn't care. It wasn't about what anyone else thought. It was about my happiness, my future, and I wasn't going to let anyone, especially not him, take that from me. Bride exposes groom's secret at the altar. The days following the wedding were a whirlwind. The first few days, I didn't even know how to process what had happened. I had to keep reminding myself that I had done the right thing, even though everything felt so wrong. It was difficult facing everyone, friends, family, even strangers who had heard about the scandal. I knew the whispers would never fully stop, but I had to keep going forward. I took some time off work and stayed with my best friend. She was my rock, the only person who truly understood the pain I was feeling. She reassured me that I wasn't alone, and that no matter how much I doubted myself, I had made the right choice. One evening, I received a text from him. It was a simple message. "Can we talk? Please, I need to explain." I felt a mix of emotions, anger, confusion, but also a small part of me that wondered if I had made the wrong call. My heart hesitated for a moment, but then I remembered how he had lied to me for months, how he had disrespected me and our relationship. I blocked his number. I didn't need an explanation. I had heard enough from him already. There was nothing left to say. The weeks went by, and slowly I began to rebuild my life. I started seeing a therapist to work through the trauma of the betrayal, and little by little, I regained my confidence. I spent time doing the things I loved, focusing on my career, and reconnecting with friends I had neglected in the whirlwind of planning the wedding. I even started dating again, but cautiously, with my guard up. Looking back, I realized that the wedding day wasn't the worst day of my life. The worst day was the moment I allowed myself to believe that I could change someone who didn't want to change for me. But now I knew better. I knew that love wasn't supposed to feel like a constant battle. It was supposed to be about trust, respect, and honesty. Eventually, I found peace. I never expected my life to take such an unexpected turn, but now I could see it as a lesson. A painful one, but a lesson nonetheless. I would never again let anyone treat me as less than I deserved. And as for the groom, I don't know what happened to him. I don't care. I had moved on, and that was all that mattered.